So with that, I will move us into the first speaker session. This one is entitled Municipalities and Industry Showing Leadership. If I could have Craig Stewart, AnnLisa Jensen, and James Bornemann come up to the stage and take their seats, please. We're looking here at communities that have taken nature-based solutions on as a way to solve some of the problems that they're facing and advance some of the solutions that they want for their communities and for their areas. And also a conversation from an industry leader who is trying to help these communities finance and create a business case for the work that they're going to do. We have with us today Craig Stewart from the Insurance Bureau of Canada. He leads their national work on disaster resilience and climate change. The Insurance Bureau is the industry association representing the property and casualty insurance industry. Their members employ over 122,000 Canadians, and they've paid out in 2016 over $9.8 billion, primarily due to severe weather and wildfire. Previous to working with the Insurance Bureau, Craig directed the Arctic program of the Ottawa Bureau for World Wildlife Fund Canada. He has handled pandemic liaison, trade liaison, and humanitarian donations for GlaxoSmithKline in Canada. And he directed the $60 million federal, provincial, territorial program at NRCan to elevate Canadian geospatial industry. And he also helped found the Mistakis Institute at the University of Calgary. He has a Master's of Science from U of Calgary, a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Toronto, and is the author of 2 atlases on the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, British Columbia, and Manitoba. Or, sorry, Montana, not Manitoba. Manitoba, you don't matter. I think we learned that yesterday. Certainly not to the Rocky Mountains. AnnLisa Jensen is serving her second term as a Division I councillor in Parkland County, a large rural municipality west of Edmonton, Alberta. Prior to this, she has dedicated her career to local government in economic development, tourism, and as a cultural administrator. She's a lifelong resident of Parkland County and a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. She currently serves as the representative for rural Alberta on the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Board of Directors and chairs the Standing Committee on Environmental Issues and Sustainable Development. And she's the Alberta Regional Board member with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. She has served also as the chairperson of the Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance and the vice chair of the North Saskatchewan Headwaters Alliance. James Bornemann is a geomatics and project manager with the Southeast Regional Service Commission in New Brunswick. He works to link research, regulation, and the creation of decision-making tools, often with a focus on climate change adaptation. He's collaborated on several pilot projects that use models to identify climate risks with a focus on flooding and natural assets. And just a little plug here, their community, their region was a partner on a pilot with the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, which I am also proud to be a board member of. And he has collaborated on several pilots that use models. Oh, I said that. He then works with staff to turn these research results into policies, regulations, and adaptation plans. He leads the team who develops information and decision support tools that include climate change and natural asset considerations into land planning, recreation, and asset management. We'll take a minute and ask you to welcome the 3 speakers. So given our timing, we'll keep our speakers' times intact, and if we do have time at the end for some Q&A, we will do that, and otherwise we'll just make sure that we get to hear from these folks. Craig will go first. We'll go in the order that they're seated, and if we have time, we'll do Q&A. If not, I might ask a moderator a question or 2. Okay, thanks very much. You've got microphones there, or you can use the podium. It's fine with me.
Hi everyone, good morning. Thanks, Jay. So as Jay said, I represent the Insurance Bureau of Canada. So we're the sort of industry association that represents about 200 companies across the country that insure your home, automobile, and business insurance in Canada. So I'm just going to give a bit of a primer on insurance to sort of set the stage for where nature-based solutions fit in. So insurance, properly deployed, is about financial safety, financial security. Insurance involves the transfer of risk from the public, so governments, their taxpayers, and consumers, to the private capital markets. You pay us premiums to take risk away from you. Insurance, therefore, acts as a financial buffer. whether you are an individual, a business, or government, and it increases your resilience to a financial calamity. Through your premiums, we send price signals to incent desired behavior and to reduce risk. As a form of contract, if you take actions to lower your risk, you, your customers, your taxpayers are rewarded with lower premiums. We price risk. The lower the risk, the lower everyone pays. In Canada, we price natural disaster risk using sophisticated models for earthquake, wildfire, flooding, hail, wind. For example, 3 private sector modeling companies provide services to insurers mapping the risk of flooding. As their models reflect lowered risk, insurance premiums for a particular location go down. So for example, if a municipality builds a fire station, all residents served by that fire station will face a lower risk of a fire spreading. That's reflected in our models, and residents pay lower premiums as a result. If a municipality improves stormwater drainage or builds diversion and retention facilities, that lowers an insurer's risk, and the insurer would also adjust premiums as a result. Our challenge now, though, is how to incorporate natural defenses into our risk pricing and build incentives around them so that if municipalities protect nature where it protects us, they will be rewarded. Reinsurers are a key actor here. So insurers actually bundle up the risk that you pay us to take, and then we pass that on to global reinsurers, paying them in turn. So reinsurers like Munich Re and Swiss Re are insurance companies that back insurance companies. Reinsurers draw upon the power of the capital markets, maintain significant investment capital, which can be used not only to backstop losses, but to invest in resiliency measures that drive good behavior. Now, I spoke about fire stations earlier. We want to incent the construction of new, quote, fire stations in Canada that limit the extent and spread of future flooding. In particular, we want to limit widespread fluvial, so that's waterfront, riverfront, and coastal flooding. And the best way to do that is by keeping water on the landscape in springtime for as long as possible using natural means, and by conserving natural features that will protect us from sea level rise. Engaging reinsurers can help us in 2 ways. First, since reinsurers set the prices that insurers pay for risk, if reinsurers factor restoration of natural protection into their pricing, insurers and their customers should pay less. Second, reinsurers can enter into specific types of contracts with municipalities or provinces to provide blended financing for conserving nature where it protects exposed communities. These resilience bonds can be best illustrated with a hypothetical case example. So the City of Windsor, Ontario, is currently the highest per capita loss area for flooding in Canada. Partially, this is because it has subdivisions built directly on drained wetlands. Partially, this is because it rains a lot there. And partially, it's because 95% of the wetlands upstream have been drained for agricultural purposes. The area is prone to high runoff, both in spring and during extreme weather events. A resilience bond could be a type of insurance contract secured for the citizens of Windsor, which would provide insurance protection for a period of, let's say, 10 years. The reinsurer could price that contract, assuming certain de-risking measures are put in place, and then take the appropriate premium reductions and front-end load them, thereby creating a resilience fund. That fund could be blended with government contributions and used to incent restoration of wetlands on unproductive agricultural lands in partnership with an NGO such as Alice Canada. Has this been done before? Yes. So recently in Mexico, Swiss Re partnered with the Nature Conservancy to develop a reinsurance contract incenting the protection of the Mesoamerican reef, where it provides storm surge protection, helping hotels retain their beach sand. I can tell you that there's a remarkable appetite in the financial sector to innovate around green investment vehicles and novel mechanisms that promote resilience. However, there are very few bilingual people in this country, those able to speak the language of both nature conservation and finance. We have a very strong, innovative banking sector, insurance sector, and investment sector in this country. We're interested in exploring connections in this space. We could design and incubate concepts that could then be piloted and scaled. We have an advantage in that we have extensive insurance risk data for Canada and a wealth of conservation data that could be merged to determine areas of opportunity. I'll leave it there. Thank you, and I'll turn it to my colleagues to follow us on.
Well, good morning, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, the invitation to be here on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people and at the summit here with all of you. It's been a tremendous experience so far, certainly one I won't forget. I love it when all my worlds collide. It doesn't happen very often with the different hats, so this is truly a happy place for me. I've enjoyed it very much. I believe I have some slides. They're just going to advance behind me so I don't have to explain so much. I don't need a clicker. You may be sick of them by the time we're done, but they'll be well embedded. So covering the amazing work that municipalities are doing across Canada in this nature-based climate solution space in 10 minutes is, of course, a challenge. But I'm going to put a focus on Alberta, specifically to our collaborative efforts around our watershed work, which is where my passion lies. As we know, local government is closest to the people's daily lives. We impact land use planning and decision making, so it is a serious responsibility indeed. First, however, it is my honor to serve on the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Board as the representative for rural Alberta. We are an elected board of directors of 75 municipal politicians, if you can imagine. But we are comprised of dedicated, amazing individuals who serve their municipalities and their country, and fantastic administrators who ensure that we bring local solutions to the national table. And we represent nearly 2,000 local governments, which is representative of more than 90% of the Canadian population. In the area of environmental issues and sustainable development at FCM, there are priority advocacy issues that we have communicated to the federal government on behalf of our member municipalities throughout the recent election. These include adequate funding for local disaster mitigation and climate adaptation, strengthening local capacity to assess and respond to climate risks, supporting natural climate solutions, accelerating the adoption of zero-emission vehicles, the elimination of plastic waste, and the need to engage FCM in the ongoing development and implementation of federal climate policies and programs. We've also worked with the Insurance Bureau of Canada, just recently with Craig here, to create information for the government on the costing of climate adaptation. So this gives you an idea of our priorities through FCM. So moving into Alberta is a tremendous example of intermunicipal collaboration that has resulted in the recent almost completion of the document, which is our watershed management plan for the Sturgeon River. Now, these documents, of course, are done across Canada. This work is mandated and funded in Ontario to some extent, but in Alberta, this work is completely voluntary, and local government has stepped into the gap within our Municipal Government Act legislation with minimal funding, but with great intent to fill data gaps, improve our knowledge of the watershed, and create this report, which has now been several years in the making. And you'll see reference to the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance, or NSWA, behind me. Under the Government of Alberta's Water for Life strategy, the NSWA became one of 11 watershed planning and advisory councils in Alberta in 2005. The first order of business for WPAC is to initiate a State of the Watershed report, which NSWA created, followed by an integrated water management plan, which was released in 2012. And you'll see that a State of the Watershed report was completed for the Sturgeon River watershed in the same year. One of the main recommendations in that report was to form a municipally led watershed group as an alliance with elected officials from as many municipalities located in the watershed as possible in a steering committee format, with a technical advisory committee comprised of our staff, who of course have the expertise to move things forward through policy and land use bylaw development. The Sturgeon River watershed is unique to others in Alberta due to its tremendous effects it's seeing after 100 years post-settlement, and on top of the challenges you'll see on one of the slides. There's a lot of pressure on this watershed. So to address the challenges, our local governments approved a terms of reference, and the SRWA started in 2013. After almost 7 years, our alliance continues to grow after 12 technical studies that were required, representing over $500,000 in grants to fill data gaps and increase our knowledge of the area. You'll see behind me that there are now 13 municipalities at the table, along with local stewardship groups and the provincial government. Not added to the slide yet, but vitally important as we move forward, are our recent new partners to the table, Alexander First Nation and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4, and Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation, who we hope to welcome back soon as well. The addition of traditional knowledge and view of the watershed is vitally important for us moving forward. It's a priority for me, and as chair, I'm very excited to have the voices of our neighboring nations and the Métis at the table at this very important time in the formation of the final document, after some good conversations and great timing that will invite them to participate and share their knowledge and wisdom. The main focus of our work moving forward will be the intermunicipal policy alignment. This is a really key piece. As we know, water has no boundaries, and alignment is key to equalize any economic development competition and ensure that protections, restoration goals, and actions moving forward are united and coordinated. The synergy and commitment displayed by this group of councillors on behalf of their municipalities and all of our partners is truly inspiring for me. And the facilitation support of the NSWA, that is really their role at the table. They compile the grants, write them, disseminate the data for us, as well lead the technical advisory group. I believe we set just a tremendous example of rural-urban voluntary collaboration that will move us forward into the next step of our journey, which is finally action after many years. So this intermunicipal model has led to some truly groundbreaking initiatives as well in the Modeste watershed, where the North Saskatchewan Headwaters Alliance, consisting of 5 more counties and 3 towns in this area, have come together to do some great work as well. This area has been identified by the province as a priority for flood and drought mitigation and for water quality. And our intermunicipal group identified as a priority the development of a riparian health action plan using a brand new method of data collection through GIS that has mapped areas of disturbance in this significant watershed. It's the first of its kind, actually. This model is now being used in the Sturgeon River watershed, so we're very proud of that. So now over 2,000 kilometers of riparian area have been assessed in this new tool, which includes a 2-part assessment protocol that evaluates the intactness of the riparian area, as well as pressures on riparian health from adjacent upland areas. The combination of these 2 scores provide practical advice for prioritizing conservation and restoration efforts. And we're in the process of figuring out what that means for our municipalities. Lara from Alice Canada may be speaking further about the Modeste Natural Infrastructure Project that Parkland County is engaged with the NSWA, the University of Guelph, and Initech. But the purpose is to understand the positive impact of natural infrastructure on local and downstream communities, determine the scale of restoration for wetland and riparian areas, cost effectiveness of natural versus built infrastructure, and provide guidance for project proponents, stakeholders, and decision makers to incorporate natural infrastructure into their immediate and long-term needs under a changing climate. So there's lots going on in Alberta around this work. I'm always pleased to see the full engagement of our rural municipalities at these tables as we move forward. It's a very exciting time for municipal collaboration and leadership on the ground in our province, with over 40 municipalities participating in the initiatives of these WPACs across the province. This work will result in addressing the challenges facing our watersheds by having local government fully step into their power to impact land use through knowledge, better decision-making, policy alignment, restoration, and conservation objectives. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to start by acknowledging that we are on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. And I'm also really grateful for the wise and embracing welcome we received yesterday from Elder Claudette Commanda. I'm very excited and honored to be here today to talk about the Southeast Regional Service Commission's recent experience with the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative that we just wrapped up. Through these pilots, we had 2 in our region. We evaluated wetlands and forests for the value they provide directly towards providing municipal services. We feel this evidence-based approach of including nature in municipal asset management provides a new and compelling tool not only for environmental protection but also for climate change adaptation. Just to give a little context, the service commissions in New Brunswick, we provide planning and development services for 12 municipalities in the surrounding rural areas. And I guess this work had its initial roots actually in starting about 10 years ago in adaptation to coastal flooding and adaptation to sea level rise. While we didn't initially consider nature in coastal adaptation, this work was really important moving forward because it got communities in our region used to adaptation and climate change aspects towards flooding. It was really when we moved into inland adaptation of freshwater flooding that we realized the importance of nature. We realized that we could map inland floodplains considering climate change, but if the catchment areas experienced significant loss in wetlands and forests, our maps would quickly be outdated and underestimate the risk. And when we looked at tools to make sure that these important natural assets were protected, the kind of mechanisms to do that on a watershed-wide scale was limited. So we started to look for other approaches. And this is when we came across the work of Gibson's British Columbia. They were saying some really interesting things, like nature was their most important type of infrastructure. That creeks, ponds, and riparian areas provided about $3 to $4 million worth of stormwater services. And they're able to incorporate these findings into not only asset management infrastructure decisions, but also into community plans and bylaws. We then started to follow the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, who started to work with 5 communities across Canada to implement the Gibson's kind of methods on a wider scale. And when the MNI put out a second call of proposals to work with another 5 communities, we jumped at the opportunity. So through the M&I pilot, we were able to work with 2 communities in our region. The first was Riverside, Alberta. This is a small village of about 350 people. Here we wanted to know the value that the forests provide in providing clean and abundant water in their surface water supply. Here the work focused more on a risk management perspective to understand what it would mean financially if the forest or a portion of the forest in the watershed was lost. And then also how the provisioning of water was going to change with climate change. The second pilot was in Riverview, a growing town of about 20,000 people. And here we're looking at an area of proposed development. This area had an initial master plan that didn't consider the wetlands and forests in the area. And in fact, the future roads were planned to go right through them, the wetlands. And through this study, we looked at the life cycle infrastructure costs the town would incur if these wetlands and forests were lost. And we used an evidence-based approach, and we evaluated nature using the same tools used to design engineered infrastructure. So now I just wanted to share a couple of the key findings that came out of the projects. The first one is that site-specific valuation was really important. When we first met with the communities, there was a general agreement in the room that, yes, wetlands were important, but it was more on a theoretical basis. It wasn't until we actually placed a value on the wetlands in terms of the financial costs the municipality would incur if they were lost, that really spurred action. So over the next couple of months, we just wrapped up the project. So we're kind of going into the implementation phase now, but we'll be working with the town to develop a secondary plan that will ensure that development is placed around the important natural assets in that area. The second thing we found that really the effects of climate change were greater than anticipated. Generally in Atlantic Canada, there's a kind of a rule of thumb that flows, that engineered infrastructure should be designed 20% larger than historic flows to account for climate change. We found that should be more like 30%. And in Riverside, Alberta, with their water supply, even though the annual increase in water was increasing, we did find a kind of a new drought scenario that could be anticipated where, that Craig alluded to earlier, where you have a warm winter and a smaller snowpack, which would translate, and a drier spring would translate into a summer drought, which they have not experienced in the past, but could likely in the future. We did find that natural assets had a greater value in the future with climate change. This was especially the case when you look at the, for two reasons. One is when you look at the life cycle costs, natural assets kind of have a perpetual life cycle, whereas engineered infrastructure have a finite lifespan that need to be replaced. But also because in sizing infrastructure, for whatever reason, they were undersized, and we see from our work that the climate risks are increasing. If those assets needed, and built assets need to be replaced sooner, then that poses a risk to the communities and a higher cost to replace them sooner than expected. I won't go into it much, but, and I guess related to that is that we also found through modeling future development scenarios that if the future development doesn't, it puts a greater strain on the natural assets. You know, natural assets are resilient, but also only to a certain extent. That, you know, natural assets would lose their capacity if they were degraded. So it's important that future development ensures that considers least impact designs. And then finally, the current legislation places a lot of barriers to include nature as an asset. One example is, and asset management standards actually exclude nature from being accounted for in an asset management framework. These are changing, but it's slow, and there's, I think, a lot of good discussion around these issues. And I guess the key point I really want to make is that we feel it's really important, especially in a municipal kind of grounds-on scenario, and especially in the current legislation framework, that evaluating nature in an equivalent way to engineering assets is really essential to start to make these decisions to take natural assets seriously and the multiple benefits they can provide. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All three of you are amazingly timely people, and so we do have a bit of time left for questions. There are 2 microphones in the room. If you'd like to ask a question, please step up to one of the mics, and we'll just take turns. One of the things that I noticed, I just wanted to sort of seed as a question, you both mentioned some real challenges to getting this done, and you had mentioned some things that really helped get over some of those challenges. I wondered if any of you wanted to respond to, you know, what was the one biggest thing that you had to overcome to be able to advance nature-based solutions in your community?
Sure, I can go. That's a good question. I mean, I think initially it was from a technical standpoint to actually figure out how to actually model nature services in kind of an equivalent way to an engineered asset. You know, there's a big learning curve, but I think that was when we were able to overcome with the help of the M&I team, who helped provide, you know, that Canada-wide experience. And then I feel like we're at a step now where the pilots were fairly successful in terms of bringing the value of natural assets forward. So,
yeah, just quickly, and then we'll go out.
Sure. I think for us, the issue was jurisdiction of water. And when we formed the alliance, it's taken us 7 years. I anticipated as chair that we'd be just raring to go and get to solutions, but what the State of the Watersheds report showed was just tremendous data gaps, and in some of the priority areas there was nothing in terms of science. So we had to back the train up, go and apply for all these grants, make sure we had the data and the science and the modeling that was required, and that's really where we have spent the past 5 years, which requires a lot of grant applications, a lot of patience from our councils who wonder what the heck we're doing over there, and now we finally have a plan and that needs a bit more work with incorporation of our Indigenous and traditional knowledge, but it takes time, and that means patience, and keeping everybody at the table is always very important because not everybody necessarily believes in rural areas and the importance of this work. If they don't see a river flowing through their area, they don't understand that everybody lives in a watershed. So the myriad of challenges, but really just the length of time it's taken to get here.
Can I go to the room? Hi, over here, go ahead.
Hello, James Casey from Birds Canada. A question about operation and maintenance long term. I was wondering how that works. Where do the funds come to maintain these natural assets as we reframe them from parks to protected areas to infrastructure that needs maintenance to function? Maybe just a couple comments on that.
I can go first. So in our case, where we have essentially an insurance contract design, there's the Mesoamerican Reef example set up a trust fund. That trust fund then actually pays for maintenance of the natural asset. So with the Mesoamerican Reef, if you have a hurricane or a significant storm and chunks of coral break off, coral can actually be replanted within 48 hours and it will survive. And so that trust fund actually pays for local workers to come out and replant the coral after a storm. And thereby maintain the asset. So in this case, with the way that the entire framework is set up, the contract, it actually should pay and be evergreen for making sure that there is maintenance, if not restoration, of the natural asset over time.
Yeah, I can just follow up from a kind of a more municipal point of view. Operation, kind of the plan is by incorporating nature into asset management frameworks, that would replace kind of higher costs of maintenance of engineered infrastructure. So it would come out of municipal budgets. And a lot of the M&I pilots found that the long-term operation maintenance costs were much lower than engineered assets. So it would be a big benefit to communities.
Okay, over on this side.
Yeah, it's to do with the insurance business. First of all, my premiums have never gone down in my life, so which is interesting.
You're just a risky guy, I guess.
Yeah, and I've done nothing to deserve it because I've always. And one of my big gripes is not so much the insurance industry there, but is the fact that where houses were built, like in the old days, along rivers and all that, you're going to have, with the changing climate, there's more flooding and all that. And that's a sad thing for a lot of people. But what's really bothering me is that the people who call themselves developer, who to me are speculators, are building even today and getting away with it in floodplains. And the municipalities are doing nothing about it, I guess because they're in the pockets of the same developers. What are you going to do about that with the municipalities? Because it's a scandal that some of the huge flooding we had, I live in Ottawa, and we've had along the Ottawa River and then down on the St. Lawrence near Montreal. It's in new areas, new developed areas, where they're being flooded out on land they should never have built on. It should have been, turned into parklands. So are you guys putting pressure on the cities? To me, it's a scandal, and it's tragic, because people buy their houses in good faith in floodplains, not realizing it, and then they're flooded out. Even if they're reimbursed,
Yes.
as you know, it doesn't reimburse everything.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
yeah, so this is not strictly a nature-based solutions issue, but the right now there is a very let's say there's the Minister of Public Safety has a mandate to reform basically the way that the incentive system works around floods in this country, and so that's part of his actual mandate letter. So there are very intense discussions right now on exactly that topic. About how do we realign the incentive system in this country. And the bottom line is that as long as you have a system where people are being bailed out by government using taxpayer funds by governments, you don't have that proper incentive system in place. And what we expect going forward, and this will happen in the very near future, is that if developments happen on floodplains, there won't be any insurance backing for new development. There'll be no government assistance for those. So you have to turn off the money tap so that there's high risk for those people, and then you get into liability issues with developers who build in those places. So anyway, I'll leave it there.
I've known Dale Marshall, who spoke yesterday, for years, and I'll never forget one day he said to me, "I make it a lifelong policy never to live in a place called Delta." Can we come back to this side, please?
Hello, bonjour, namaste. Hello, everyone to the room. My name is Andre, and I work kind of in the space of interpretation, as you described, the bilingualism. And so I work on a project with Caroline in Canada. We have an organization called Pillar Nonprofit and Verge Capital. We run a social finance arm. And we're exploring what conservation finance could look like. And what I really appreciate about all of you is you all talk about collaboration. Right? That's essential to what you're describing in all of your work. And I think that's also what's essential for this work to actually, happen, for us to grow this effort that we're seeing in the room. And so, actually, I love that you brought up the resilience mechanism. And I'm just curious about how you believe we're going to create more collaboration. And I think from the point of view I sit, and I've lived in the nonprofit industry most of my life, how do we work with more of our private sector? We've just signed a contract for a pilot on our conservation impact bond with a corporation, a large corporation, and so we're looking to slowly create more partnerships with more of the private sector actors. I know the insurance, obviously you're part of that community and you're looking to do more. I'm just curious about other ways that you're seeing collaboration that can happen to help us increase the flow of funds, not only the funds, but the time of people, the expertise of people, and the kind of political and social buy-in that's required to kind of make this work happen.
So, so it starts with meetings like this, obviously, being able to basically socialize these concepts, exchange ideas. You've got the last panel today, which is really about moving forward and really about how are you going to take all of this and actually ground it and move forward. That's probably obviously a critical piece. This is a global conversation happening right now. It's not just in Canada, right? So there's incredible innovation happening in this space around the world. Canada's poised to play a leadership role. There actually is going to be, through the Global Commission on Adaptation and Nature-Based Solutions track for the first time, and that will lead to COP26 in Glasgow. There's a lot happening in this space. But too often we can just simply serve as an echo chamber and repeat success stories rather than taking a look at how do we ground this within the Canadian context and actually select pilot specific areas, fund them and scale them. And so, we're in the process of looking for partners on that and looking for ideas. And so it's about communication and engagement. So, I'll leave it there, but somehow we have to go from the sort of 30,000 foot level to say, okay, how are we going to make it real on the ground? And these folks to my left have experience with making this stuff real on the ground. So.
Got time, I think, at least for one more, if we can keep the question really tight.
Yeah, so Jay, you asked about what was the biggest hurdle that you had to overcome for success. I'm wondering what the next big hurdle that we all have to address collectively is to move nature-based solutions forward, because we do have lots of pilot projects and knowledge about this. Is it funding? Is it more municipal leadership? Like, what do we have to do to actually scale this stuff up?
I think it's overcoming some of these legislative barriers to start to work with nature. And especially from an asset management framework that, as I mentioned, just currently excludes nature as a tangible capital asset that can be included in municipal asset management. So there's ways to get around this. You can Gibson's has a great discussion paper on how they go about almost having a second set of books, which they can use together, but it's not. It's all public and everything, but it's just not as. It's not as.
You're in trouble here.
Yeah. Well, I think Manny uses that term too. So I think that's a big shift that needs to occur to kind of mainstream natural assets in that municipal context.
AnnLisa, did you want to say?
Yeah, no, I certainly agree, and I've been pondering and thinking about, how quickly, and it gives me hope. Just a few years ago, natural infrastructure, certainly when I was elected, wasn't even something we talked about last year. Even trying to get this on stage at a World Conference is impossible. So that's why it's so inspiring to be here, because what it's taught me and shown me is how quickly, things can become mainstream, these concepts that we have to start thinking of. From a municipal side of things, it's really the same. I think I'm cutting in and out here. it has to be led by municipal leaders. So when I even think of our own municipality as a rural county, our staff are doing great work, but this hasn't even started to permeate up into a political discussion. So that's where we have to step up as leaders and think outside the box and open our minds to what is traditional built infrastructure versus the importance of natural infrastructure. And some municipalities are going to move much faster than others, but I am hopeful. I know that we'll be bringing forward next year quietly. Our staff is working on that. It's going to be very interesting to see how our council accepts this. So it can be a mainstream thought in some rooms, but you try to take that back to a rural municipality, for example, and we really have to be educating slowly with patience to say, look, this is coming. It's going to affect how we value, how we account, how we build, and that it's a great opportunity, not something to be threatened or worried about.
Great. Thank you very much. Can we give the panel a hand? We're going to wrap it up there to keep on time.